I'll call to order this meeting of the Lincoln City Council. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is located at the rear of the council chambers by the door in which you enter. The meeting today, you know what? Let's start again. On microphone. Good afternoon. I'll call to order this meeting of the Lincoln City Council. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is located at the rear of the council chambers. The meeting today is part of the ongoing development of the 2024-2026 city budget. The mayor submitted a proposed budget to the council on June 10th. City departments provided further details and information at two council meetings held June 11th and 12th. By council resolution, council members submitted initial tentative changes to the city budget to the budget office by 3 p.m. Friday, July 12th. 5 tentative changes were proposed and 1 was subsequently withdrawn. Three of the remaining proposals were voted to move forward. By council resolution, council members had a second opportunity to submit additional proposed changes to the city budget by 3 p.m. Friday, August 9th. 6 additional proposals were submitted, and those were delivered to the budget office and to all council members, as well as posted online. Today, we will discuss those changes. Today, we will also vote on whether to have the budget office and city law deliver those as final amendments to the city budget. The order of business today is as follows. The additional proposals will be taken in order, number 6 through number 11. I will read the change submitted to the budget office with a short description and then invite the proposer to speak about their proposal and any other information they'd like to give. Then I will invite comments from council members as well as questions for the proposer or for city staff. As a reminder, just a moment. As a reminder, we will vote on these proposals at the end of this meeting today, or one at a time today. With that, I will begin to read the first of the additional proposals. I would also take a point of privilege and note that Proposal 6 and Proposal 7 are very similar, with the only difference being the fund source. Number 6.
Stop, according to them.
I know, and so I was modifying on the fly while I read.
Pause the meeting and pause the show and get you what you need.
I will pause just one moment.
I'm sure we have a short recess.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a
Recess?
short recess.
Yeah. I want to get you what you need.
Hey, I've got a question for you. Let's turn this off.
Good afternoon. We're back from recess, and thank you for your patience. I think it's obvious that sometimes putting the budget together takes a lot of hands, and sometimes it's done at the last minute. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting of Lincoln City Council again to order. The Open Meetings Act, as noted earlier, is located at the rear of council chambers. The meeting today is part of the ongoing development of the 2024-2026 city budget. The mayor submitted a proposed budget to the council on June 10th. City departments provided further details and information at 2 council meetings held June 11th and June 12th. By council resolution, council members submitted initial tentative changes to the city budget to the budget office by 3 p.m. Friday, July 12th. 5 tentative changes were proposed. 1 was subsequently withdrawn. 3 of the remaining proposals were voted to move forward. By council resolution, council members had a second opportunity to submit additional proposed changes to the budget by 3 p.m. Friday, August 9th. 6 additional proposals were submitted, and those were delivered to the budget office and to all council members, as well as posted online. On Monday, August 12th, council members discussed those changes. Today, we will vote on whether to have the budget office and city law deliver those as final amendments to the city budget. The order of business today is as follows. The additional proposals will be taken in order, number 6 through number 11, and number 1, number 2, and number 5. I will read the proposal and then invite the proposer to move it as a motion. I will then ask for a second. Discussion will occur. Amendments may be offered and voted on. Then a final vote will be taken on the item. I'd like to invite City Attorney Yohansi Christie to confirm our process for today.
Yes, happy to answer any questions before we get started, but I would just reiterate or remind everyone, the voting session happens today. And so if a council member wants to, based upon their initial submissions that Friday, and then on Monday, based upon the discussion, if a council member wishes to move their original submission as is, that's fine. If they wish to present it altered, it does not require a vote, right? So if someone is going to say, if a council member wishes to say, I'm introducing, since Monday, based upon the discussion, I've amended it this way, they do not need a motion to do that because the voting session is happening now. So.
Should be reflected in the handout.
So
And I think you did state that. I'm just clarifying that again because I do think it gets a little confusing when we go through this process.
Or ownership of the particular motion is done by the first person that submitted. I know we have one that has a couple of them on it, don't we?
You mean who would be moving and then,
Yes.
yeah, the introducer.
The introducer.
Okay.
So
So,
And then get a second, and then there'll be a discussion. You'll treat it like every other voting session.
okay. So just to reiterate for my own,
Yep.
I'm taking a little
Sure.
shorthand right here. The original submitter could move as is.
Correct?
They could move it as they modified it.
Correct. Neither of which requires a
Right,
vote.
those are modifications, and then another council person may offer an amendment.
Correct.
All right. So,
Mr. City Attorney, or Madam Chair. Mr. City Attorney, while we have you up here, can you outline the process for amendments to amendments, how that works?
So we have to look to Robert's rules, and I think how Robert's rules characterize, and I can grab the book, but it's basically primary and secondary motions. And so where we were at is you are actually making an amendment to the budget resolution. So that would be the primary amendment. If there is if a council member wishes to amend that proposal, that would be what I would consider a secondary amendment. Robert's rules is there is no third amendment after that.
So if a council member wants to collaborate with a colleague on an introduced amendment, is the appropriate avenue for that to offer a contrary amendment then? Like a separate amendment?
If I think I understand your question, you would have a council member propose, say proposal A, as
Yep.
then there would be a second, there would be a discussion, and then you're saying if that needs to
Then
be,
if
is that
there's-
what you're talking about, if there's an amendment to that?
Yes, so there are multiple modifications, and then there are multiple amendments. There's an amendment on the floor to a proposal,
Okay?
and that amendment, if.
It's a
council-
secondary amendment.
Yeah, yes. How can council members then approach that amendment if they want to alter it?
So you would vote on the secondary amendment. So you could vote it down, and then there could be, assuming it was voted down, you could have
Introduce
another
an
amendment.
alternative
Introduce another
amendment.
amendment.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're clear on process before we get started.
I think that's why I was called up here.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. I think that's helpful for all of us. And don't go very far, because we may have another question that arises.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, City Attorney Christie. I will read the first of the additional proposals. Number 6, modified by Councilmember Weber, is to appropriate $100,000 of general fund reserves for fiscal year 24-25 to Lincoln Police Department for training. The appropriation is intended for trainings and training materials, equipment that, 1, increase productivity, 2, assists with employee retention, and 3, improves interactions internally and with members of the community. These trainings can include, but are not limited to, National Association Field Training Officer Training, Survival Tactics Instructor Certification, Senior Management Institute for Police, and ICAT Instructor Course, Integrating Communications, Assessments, and Tactics, Resilient Minds, and School Resource Officer Training. Any appropriations remaining at 8/31/2025 shall be reappropriated for similar training purposes until $100,000 of appropriations is fully expended. Appropriate $100,000 of general fund reserves for fiscal year 24-25 to Lincoln Fire and Rescue Department for training. The appropriation is intended for trainings and training materials, equipment that, number 1, increase productivity, 2, assist with employee retention, and 3, improves interactions internally and with members of the community. Any appropriations remaining at 8/31/2025 shall be reappropriated for similar training purposes until $100,000 of appropriations is fully expended.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move this proposal as modified.
Second.
Second, Beckius. Discussion. Councilman Weber.
Thank you, Chair Washington. I just want to briefly discuss my modifications without getting too into the weeds with my colleague's proposal. But, there's two primary differences that I see. One is funding mechanism. The other is direct language that talks about reappropriation. My understanding is the intent for my colleague's proposal is that it also will be reappropriated. So I'll mainly discuss funding mechanism, but first, just pointing out the modifications, right? Going from $115,000 down to $100,000 for the Lincoln Police Department training. I broadened the language to where it was not as restrictive of which trainings must be utilized, but instead the purpose, which, as I mentioned on Monday, is increasing productivity, assisting with employee retention, and improving interactions both internally and with members of the community. This allows for the Lincoln Police Department to have more flexibility in choosing which trainings best suit their needs. And then I also introduced a modification to appropriate $100,000 from the general fund as well to the Lincoln Fire and Rescue Department for trainings for also increased productivity, assistance with employee retention, as well as improving interactions both internally within the department as well as with members in the community. Has similar reappropriation language as the police training does. And my modification when it comes to language was in consultation with Chief Engler from Lincoln Fire and Rescue, as well as Chief Morrow from Lincoln Police Department, and they both signaled that this language will get them the training, the resources for training that they need. I also wanted to be very explicit that these dollars are not just appropriated for training, but also training and training materials and equipment, so that way they have truly the resources they need to be the best trained police officers and firefighters that we have. The fundamental difference from my proposal versus that of my colleagues is the bucket that the training comes from. It's no surprise that, I believe that it is more appropriate for the funding mechanism for these trainings to come from the general fund reserve rather than council reserves. I think that there are two differing fiscal ideology, one that believes in fiscal responsibility and trust with our department directors that they can best utilize their dollars as they see fit, and one that opens the door to the use it or lose it mentality that increases or incentivizes an increase in wasteful government spending and eliminates the incentive of fiscal responsibility. And that is why I introduced the proposal as modified. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from counselors? Are there any, go ahead.
I just, in terms of a discussion, I think that this is a very thoughtful proposal. You worked hard on this, and you've made it known that you were trying to address concerns from the council since this first came up. So I really appreciate you being thoughtful, doing the hard work, and trying to come up with what I consider a very fiscally responsible proposal.
Thank you. That was the intent behind my proposal, as well as getting our first responders the training they need. So I appreciate you acknowledging that, Councilman Bowers.
Okay. Are any other questions or points that need to be clarified, or any comments? Okay. We have a motion and we have a second. Okay. Let's call the vote.
Schob,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Duden,
No.
Carlson,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
Number 7, modified, number 7, modified, yes.
I would like to withdraw my motion for modification on number 7.
All right. Motion is withdrawn from the applicant, or the proposer. Number 8, modified by Councilmember Schob. For fiscal year 2024-25, appropriate $125,000 in one-time funding from general fund reserves to urban development operating budget to support community outreach and programming efforts within urban development in coordination with the Office of the Chief Sustainability Officer. Councilman Schob. would
Thank you,
like
Madam
to
Chair.
add?
Yes, I appreciate your time. First, a brief, I appreciate the time we had on Monday to talk about this too, and I've since spoken with the Director of Urban Development, and at his advice, I think adding the words "and programming" better explain what I had in mind initially. I wanted to give urban development the ability to make decisions within their unit, and some of that was outreach, some of that was programming, and I left the word programming out. I'm not sure if it's grammatically correct with programming efforts, but it's close enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Do I make a motion now, or is that
I'm gonna.
just stop talking? Okay.
Just stop talking for just one moment. Does anyone have any questions to clarify the modification? Would you please make a motion?
Madam Chair, I move we accept this amendment at this time.
Second.
Second by Carlson. Any discussion? I would just interject that I really appreciate your hearing my concerns and expanding this so that it could be used not just for outreach, but also for programming.
I appreciate the conversation I had with all the council, and this made this better. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Benny. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Seeing no other comments or questions or discussion, Madam Clerk, let's call the vote.
Carlson,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Duden,
No.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
Number 9, submitted by Councilmember Duden, for fiscal year 2024-25, reduce Parks and Recreation budget by $2,400. Online, gold, silver, bronze ball field reservation fee increases of $1 in fiscal year 2024 25 are projected to increase the Parks and Recreation budget by $2,400. This proposal would eliminate that funding and request the Parks Director to keep the online ball field reservation fee level for fiscal year 2024-25. Councilman Duden, would you like to make a move on this proposal? Would you like to move this proposal?
Yes, I would like to move this proposal forward.
Second.
Second, Weber. Discussion.
It's an appropriate time for amendment then?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. I would move that we do look at amending this, changing the language a little bit. I mentioned before, I have a tough time with the rationale of reducing money, reducing resources when we're trying to fix something here too. I know the Parks and Rec Advisory Board spends a lot of time looking at fees, and they spend a good time with the public, trying to come up with the appropriate levels, and I think this kind of throws that off a little bit. So I guess what I would like to see is for fiscal year 24-25 is to designate 2,400 in Parks and Rec funding toward ball field improvements, online gold, silver, bronze ball field reservation fees increases of $1 in fiscal year 24-25 are projected to increase the Parks and Rec budget by $2,400. This proposal would then designate that particular funding to ball field improvements for the benefit of the users paying for those fee increases. And I recognize that this is a little bit of a philosophy shift, if you will, from how we normally operate with fees, but I think this is a good one-time fix for moving this process forward as we're in kind of this stagnated time period before we do study the appropriate ball fields.
And I would make that second on that motion to amend.
Okay, so now we have,
Is there time for discussion?
there will be, just one moment, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep everything clear. Okay, so we have a main motion, we have an amendment. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion about the amendment? Councilman Duden.
When I made this proposal, one of the things that Councilman Carlson didn't maybe take into consideration is the fact that a lot of these fees are being paid out of coaches' pockets. And so what we're proposing here with the amendment is to still increase the fees when we have deteriorating ball fields to the point where a lot of teams don't even want to play tournament games on them or any types of games on them. And, these rental fees are for practices and what have you. I think that's going to hurt some of the coaches that have been paying this out of their own pocket. And by eliminating those fees, the agreement I had with Parks and Rec Director Maggie Stuckey-Ross about this was to hold off on increases so that we could have an impact on some of these fields with some improvements, which would more than justify maybe the. And what you're proposing is that $2,400. I don't know exactly. You divide that in 4 sectors of the city. That's not much money towards improvements. And basically, my proposal was to try to help those coaches and those teams that are, operating on a dime, so to speak. So. That's why I'm against this amendment.
Councilman Weber?
Thank you, Chair Washington. I'm supportive of Councilman Carlson's amendment. It's been no secret that there are folks in our community who are upset with the state of our ball fields. I do not think that it makes sense, if we are truly going to look at improving these ball fields, to take resources away to be able to improve the ball fields, right? I think if we're going to truly talk about investing in our ball fields, improving our ball fields, I think we need to show the community that we're serious about it. And I understand that, $2,400 is not a lot for every ball field, in the city of Lincoln, but it can make a huge impact at 1 or 2. It can make an impact with our fields. And I think that it is a good first step that the city of Lincoln is committed to our youth athletic programs, our softball teams, our baseball teams, and making sure that, if the fees are going to be increased on these ball fields, you're going to see improvement, right? You're going to see us moving the needle on this issue. And I think that the message that this sends, that we are taking this concern seriously and that we are addressing it head on, is a really important message to send. This $2,400 we know then will be going to ball fields. I haven't seen the numbers of what we will fundraise, right? But also, there is nothing that prohibits individual council members from still fundraising for ball fields. So I'm supportive of this amendment because I think it moves the needle. I think it sends a strong message that the Lincoln City Council is serious about investing in our ball fields, bring them up to standard, and I really want to thank my colleague, Councilman Carlson, for introducing it. I think it's a good amendment, so thank you.
Anyone else? Councilman Bowers.
I think what I'll just say also to kind of echo what Justin Brody have said is, Justin is like the resident dad of the council, of teenagers right now. This impacts you. And so I think that as we've had people say that, the city's been neglecting ball fields recently and, we've had this huge concern, I don't think that the answer is to continue to put forward policy that essentially takes away resources from the things that people are saying that the city is currently neglecting. So I appreciate the more added focus into this and the fact that this adds more resources into making sure that we can get our ball fields up to par. And I know that there's other dollars going that way to help repair and get our ball fields up to par, up to standard. So like I said, I don't think that taking away resources from something that people in the city are saying that we're neglecting is the way to go. And so I appreciate you bringing forward this amendment.
I'd like to,
Anyone follow up? Go ahead.
Why don't you follow up and then I'll be the last.
Okay. I personally, I think raising fees is a slap in the face to the people that and going to be this huge improvement. I don't think is even possible, and it is going to take some money. But at the same time, after reviewing a report that was sent to all the council members last night about the reappropriation of fees, to see that Parks and Rec has substantial funds left over from the previous budget, makes me wonder why they weren't fixed and repaired and improved in the first place. So if this passes, I just feel like it's a slap in the face to those coaches and to those people that you're going to raise fees on people on fields that have not been improved. And I think once they are improved, that'll be more of an acceptable position, I think, to take. Yes, I am going to have an effort to raise money. I saw quite a few areas that would be avenues for extra funds for ball fields, signage in the outfield on fences and things like that would be another source of income for ball fields. And I think a lot of companies would support that with signage, and that could raise quite a bit of funds. So I think there are some avenues. I'm also going to try to work with Randy Gordon from Lincoln Parks Foundation to see if we can funnel some donation money towards the improvement of ball fields as well. So, but I just feel like this one area of increases is kind of a slap in the face to those coaches that have been pulling money out of their own pockets to fund that. So.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to take this now. First, I want to say a couple of things about, in general, Lincoln Parks and Recreation has an incredibly wide range of responsibilities. And this is a department that has one enterprise fund for golf, but no other activity is funded in an enterprise method. And so I was concerned by the initial proposal because taking $2,400 away from Parks and Rec isn't taking it away from ball fields in particular. It's taking away from their general budget, and it felt punitive to me and counterintuitive to needing to see increased funding at Parks and Recreation in order to meet all of their responsibilities. The Parks and Recreation Department and their advisory board has taken many, many hours in putting together a 10-year facility plan that lists all of the facilities that the parks have the responsibility for, and it prioritizes how each of those facilities will be addressed in the outgoing years. I would not say that ball fields are neglected, and I am a softball mom. I know those fields. I have helped teams pay for those fields, not individually out of my pocket, but as a team fee. And so though I appreciate that some coaches don't pass the cost along to the parents or the teammates, many coaches do, and that is always something that team parents totally understand. So one, I don't believe we should be punitive toward toward Lincoln Parks and Recreation. I think that they have a strong commitment to youth fitness and youth athletics. I don't have an issue with that. And I believe that the commitment that we made, Councilman Duden, last month with your previous proposal to put money toward a broad plan for ball fields shows the commitment from council, and when accepted into the budget, we'll also direct Parks and Rec to do that, as well as put money into the fields. So I'm not suggesting that the folks who've come forward don't have something important to say. I do think they have something important to say, and I believe that our commitment has already been demonstrated early on. I can support this amendment only because it restores the funding to Parks and Rec, but I could also vote down this amendment, or at least show voting down this amendment as well as the primary amendment, because I actually have a problem with earmarking. And I believe that this is an earmark. And I don't want us to become, I don't want us to get into the habit of earmarking funds based on a specific project that we want to see come forward. And it's one thing to propose a program and to provide funding for that program, but when we're taking small amounts of money and directing exactly how they're spent, especially in a department that does not have enterprise funding for this activity, I'm a little concerned by it, and for that reason, I will probably vote no on both the amendment and the original proposal.
Just for clarification, I want you to know that the reduction was for just 1 year.
Noted. Councilman Carlson.
I just like to say too, the face of baseball in Lincoln is really changing here too. We have a brand new beautiful complex, Sand Hills complex, that's going to open up on First and Cornhusker. I believe the Optimist Group fields are coming online here within the next year or so too. It's time to study these ball fields, so I am grateful for the study funds in the other motion too. Having said that, I think I will go ahead and take direction from Chair Washington. I'm going to remove my amendment and encourage others to vote against the original amendment.
Any other comments, questions for clarification? Councilman Shob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Procedural. Since we have a motion and a second on the floor for an amendment, can we just withdraw it, or do we need to vote it down?
I am so glad you jumped me on this one and asked the question. Here comes City Attorney Christie.
The council rules state that once debate has started, I believe it can be withdrawn by the mover by unanimous approval of the council. If there is not unanimous approval, I think there can also be another motion and a vote on that. But he has already moved to withdraw it, and that can be done with unanimous approval of the council since after debate has started.
And can that be done by acclamation or by roll call?
But roll call is always the clearest.
Okay.
So, I mean, he's made a motion to withdraw. I think we do a roll call to see if there's unanimous consent to let him withdraw it.
Okay. Madam Clerk, Councilman Shob.
His motion to withdraw, pardon me, Madam Chair, doesn't require a second. Does not.
It does.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Beckius,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right, the motion has been withdrawn. All right, main motion. Any other discussion on the main motion? Madam Clerk?
Beckius?
No.
Schob?
Yes.
Duden?
Yes.
Carlson?
No.
Bowers?
No.
Weber?
No.
Washington?
No.
Motion lost, 2-5.
Okay. Number 10, submitted by Councilmember Bowers. Increase funding to a total of $3 million for the Transportation Sidewalk Program for each year within the 2024 to 2030 Capital Improvement Program. Add $6.1 million for sidewalk improvements to the currently proposed municipal improvements bond issuance for a total issuance authorization of no more than $19 million. Councilman Bowers, would you like to move this proposal?
Yes, please.
Second?
Second?
John Carlson?
Justin Carlson.
Justin, I'm so sorry. He is actually better, I'm joking. All right.
Thanks again for entertaining a vote on this to bring our sidewalks up to standard. Just a few things that I would like to address. There was some conversation about, people being able to have a say. And, people still have 2 weeks to be able to call, write in, and email City Council before we do the final budget approval on August 26th. In addition, because this is broken up over 6 years, every budget cycle that we talk about this, people will have another bite at the apple to be able to get their voice heard. And in addition to that, we still have public hearings that happen, and people can still get their voice heard up until we issue the municipal bonds, right? So there's still multiple opportunities for people to get their voice heard. I do want to quote 3 people who had written in their statements that they had mentioned with their sidewalks. I shared a little bit about my personal story, and I just want to share 3 quick sentences from folks that have written in. It said, when our son was first learning to ride a Strider bike, we'd walk with him on sidewalks, and boy, they're a bit bumpy. In addition to that, there was another person who said, uneven sidewalks are a hazard for lots of folks, not just people who use a wheelchair. Parents with baby carriages, toddlers learning to walk, people walking to rehab after an injury, skateboarders, and people like me who are not innately grateful. I could go on, and I would love our community to start viewing accessibility not as something that is done for others, but something that everyone benefits. And the last one that I would like to say is, just taking my granddaughter for a walk in a stroller is nearly impossible in our neighborhood around Kohler. We stick to the bike path. So I think that there's a clear need. I think that the public's been pretty clear about the need to get our sidewalks up to par. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for clarification? Any other discussion?
Point of
Madam?
information that I would like to throw out there. This is the only one without an amendment and without discussion. So thank you so much for this to be relatively non-controversial.
Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Schob?
Yes.
Beckius?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Duden?
No.
Carlson?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
Thank you.
Number 11, submitted by Councilmember Bowers, transfer $133,121 in vacancy savings, $65,000 from fiscal year 2022-23 and $68,037 from fiscal year 23-24 from the Finance City Clerk Budget, Finance Reappropriations, General Expense Employee Benefits to City Council fiscal year 2024-25 budget and appropriate $34,879 from general fund reserves for a total of $168,000 to City Council fiscal year 2024-25 budget. Appropriate an additional $168,000 of general fund reserves to City Council fiscal year 2025-26 budget. These appropriations would be used to fund a maximum of $24,000 for each council member to hire individual council aides at their own discretion. Council aides would be used to help council members fulfill their duties with policy research, resident services, assistance on projects, and neighborhood support. These aides are optional. Council members cannot hire the same individual. Council members can determine the length and dollar amount of their aid, and the contracts run through city law. No appropriations for council aides will be reappropriated to future fiscal years. At the end of each fiscal year, any council aid appropriations will lapse to general fund reserves. James, would you like to move this proposal?
Yes, please.
A second, please?
Second.
Second, Weber.
Thanks so much. Just to provide additional opening remarks, this really ensures that we can have a city council that is made up of citizen legislators, and making sure that everyone who runs for office and is elected by their community can serve, and that they have the tools that they need, regardless if they work everyday jobs, if they're retired, if they have children, if they're single, that people who are elected by their community can serve. A couple things that I'd like to point out. I want to talk a little bit about how I came up with the funding of having this being funded through the vacancy savings. 2 years ago, and people have heard this story a million times, but just kind of throw it out there again for the record. 2 years ago, the city council voted to remove our policy research position and then to transfer that position to the city clerk's office. The city clerk desperately needed help. Everyone could agree on that. I was in support of that position. What I was not in support of was essentially weakening the city council branch of government and removing that position. The city council voted to remove that position and provide that position to the city clerk's office. 2 years go by and that position was never filled. I thought it was inappropriate that the council had their will be spoken in giving the city clerk some assistance and help that she so desperately needs, because we have the state's best city clerk, and I truly and honestly believe that. And for that to go unfilled, I think was not what the dollars were meant for. And so I wanted to ask for those dollars back to be able to fund what this position was, which was similar to the policy research position. In addition, there's been talk recently about the reserves, and the way that this is written, I feel like is a responsible way to not build up reserves and to not build up dollars that are left over, if there's dollars that's left over after we tap into the general fund. So that's a little bit how we got to there for this being first funded by the city clerk's position through the city clerk's office. Because we had allocated those dollars, that position went unfilled, and I thought it would be appropriate that those dollars would go back to city council. Last thing I want to talk a little bit about is the professional services agreement that this would be coded under. You know, professional services agreements, they're something that's very normal throughout every department in the city, through transportation utilities, parks, and even the mayor's office. If we make changes to professional services agreements, I'm really concerned about what that could look like for our entire city as a whole. You know, we have professional service agreements with, construction, or we have professional service agreements with making sure that project oversight is happening. And we also have professional service agreements even within the mayor's office. And so to create a separate rule specifically for the legislative branch of government seems really concerning to me. We are not a department. We are a separate branch of government. And I think that our rules need to be consistent. So I talked a little bit about making this available for citizens to serve on the city council, to have a makeup of citizen legislators. Talked a little about how we got to the city clerk funding, and talked a little about professional services agreements.
Any questions for Councilman Bowers to clarify? Any amendments?
Yes, Madam Chair. I submitted an amendment for consideration that states that the City of Lincoln Law Department's standard consultant agreement dated 6/3/24 will be utilized to hire council aides, and background checks and drug testing requirements for city employees will apply to council aides. I would make a motion to amend.
Okay. Is there?
Yeah, I'll second that for conversation. And can we have city law come up here?
Yep.
If that's, or actually, I'll let you speak first. Sorry, Councilman.
yeah.
I was getting ahead of myself.
I apologize proactively if there has been some misunderstanding as to the intent here of this particular agreement. The intent was simply to keep the consultant agreement standard, as I believed that we had discussed with Mr. Christie and Councilman Bowers. My understanding from Mr. Christie is that his intent was to use the standard consultant agreement as the city law department currently has, which I thought that we were in a consensus on, but maybe I'm wrong. The only addition I wanted to add because these are constituent-facing employees who work with neighborhood residents, senior citizens, children, would be to just simply ask that a background check and drug testing be a part of the hiring process for council aides. With that, I'd be happy to answer questions, or Councilman Weber, if you'd like to discuss with city law.
Yes, I just have, and I think I'll have a few questions, but I have one specific question about consultant agreement, the standard consultant agreement, and how that interacts with Article 7 of the city charter, and how that interacts with Municipal Code 218 about professional service agreements.
So I can certainly look at both of those sections that you referenced, but generally speaking, that's talking about, I think in the context that we're in, we're thinking of procurement. And so there's a process to follow with procurement. Common example that everybody is aware of would be bids, putting something out for bid. Professional services is outside of that process, outside of the procurement process that requires bidding for the lowest bidder. So if that.
See, you know, in our past conversations about this topic, I know that we've discussed professional service agreements, and it was my understanding that, you know, and I guess I could be incorrect, but my understanding was that that laid out the process for entering into a professional service agreement.
Yes, and maybe I'm not understanding your question, but the sections that you referenced, I think they're in the code. There is, and I could, if you give me a second, I can bring it up. That sort of defines professional services. And when you read the code and the charter together, I think what it is, what I'm trying to explain is what it indicates is that professional services is outside of the bid requirements that run through purchasing. That is the that is the idea of it.
If Councilman Weber would allow me a sort of a clarifying question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Attorney Christie, could you say whether or not the professional services agreement that we've been thinking about, how it lines up to the standard consultant agreement?
Thank you. That's a good question.
How it lines up?
Yes.
How
Are they referring
so?
to
What
the
do you-
same? Are they referring to the same process? How?
Yes. So
Okay.
like the consultant agreement that I think Councilman Beckius has called out in reference is the consultant agreement, is the standard consultant agreement that would be utilized by the law department when someone is hired as a for professional services.
Thank you.
There's always, exceptions, unique, but that is the standard consultant agreement that would be utilized for professional services.
Okay, so that is utilized when LTU hires professional services agreement or enters into professional services agreement, they utilize the standard consultant agreement.
Correct. Now, I do just, again, I always just caveat, I don't like to speak in absolutes because
Right.
there are always exceptions, but yes.
Okay.
That is our standard consultant agreement that we would use for professional services.
That's extremely helpful information. And then it created another question for me of how does that impact like the negotiation process for entering into an agreement like this, right? Like I know there's been conversation that there's language in the amendment that discusses that a council member would have discretion over length of an agreement, over dollar amount. I'm just curious how those two interact with one another.
So the consultant agreement, I think, the standard, if I understand your question, the standard consultant agreement has both a length of term, and to fill in, and payment for services to be filled in. So it's written in such a way that someone would enter in those specifications into the standard agreement.
Councilman Weber, if I may.
Yeah.
The intent here was simply to standardize the process, but also outside of that process, the standard consultant agreement does not specifically indicate that drug testing or background check will occur. So the standard consultant agreement was simply to standardize that language, but then also add on those two requests.
Okay. And
My understanding, and Mr. Christie, please correct me if I'm wrong, the intent of Councilman Bauer's proposal does not change in that council members can write the terms of their contract with their council aide as they see fit, as Councilman Bauer's originally specified in terms of length, payment, so on and so forth. The core terms of those agreements would still be held between the counselor and the counselor's aide, but it would just simply use the standardized form.
thank you. I appreciate that information.
Yeah. I really appreciate the specificity, so that we all know what the expectations are, what the parameters are, so that we're all writing contracts, should we enter into this kind of contract, that we're all writing our contracts in a similar fashion.
I got to comment on that. I guess a couple of concerns that I have is, we have the specific date on here, June 3rd, 2024. And so I'm worried that one would lock us into a specific date, even if there's updates to the consultant agreement. In addition to that, there's already a process put in place for professional service agreements that all departments in both branches of the government follow. And is your intent that this would then apply to the executive branch also, or just the city council?
My intent here is specifically for the council aid process.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my hangups, and one of the things that I'm concerned about is, again, creating a different set of rules for not a different department, but a different branch of government, right? And if we are going to say that for our aides, we're going to take these extra steps, because all professional service agreements are constituent facing, right? They're resident facing. They're working with the community in some way. And so I'm not saying that it's not a good point. I'm just concerned about creating a further difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch in executing these professional service agreements.
I think Councilman Bowers, thank you for helping to narrow down the conversation. I believe that Attorney Christie had said that the standard consultant agreement also applied to the executive branch. So I want to just separate out the consultant agreement that applies to executive, legislative, whomever. The separate items, I think, that you're worried about are specifically background checks and drug testing for
Right.
for consultants participating in a professional service agreement.
And I'm not even saying necessarily that I'm in opposition to those things. What I'm wondering is, if we do this for the entire city, with how many folks that we have professional service agreements with, doing background checks and drug testing requirements, what's that process going to look like? Who's going to be in charge of oversight of that? To make it consistent across the board for all departments in both branches of government. So that seems like an additional thing that the executive branch may not necessarily have with their professional agreements. And so I don't think that creating a separate set of rules is a good idea.
I think I hear you, and we're not talking about changing the rules for the executive branch. I think you're suggesting that this might extrapolate and change rules for the executive branch, but that's not what this motion is. And then Councilman Duden and Councilman Weber, pardon me. Go ahead.
Who pays for the background checks and the drug testing? That's an added cost. So where does that money come from?
Because the city council department would be the hiring department, it would be the city council budget that would pay for those two items.
Councilman Weber.
Thank you, Chair Washington. City Attorney Christie, have a few more questions. I guess I'm not aware of, the standard consulting agreement and the professional service agreement process as much as I should be. Is this a deviation from standard practice, or do we typically have individuals go through background checks and drug testing and professional service agreements? And if so, can you detail that process for us?
So probably the best person to talk to would be Human Resources, but I will do my best. And what I can tell you is that.
And if anyone from Human Resources is watching or here and wants to come up, I mean, I just want it clarified before I vote.
But I will do my best. It is my understanding that in the consultant agreements, it does not specifically call out or require background checks or drug testing. That is not to say that it is not happening in certain departments and or certain situations, depending on what someone is hired to do across the city. But it is not embedded into the process like someone that is coming onto the city through and getting access to city resources, getting health insurance, benefits, that sort of thing, where they are subject to the background check and the I would say the drug testing requirements potential for drug testing.
So then going off that, I guess, to me, it sounds like this is trying to line up some of these professional service agreements with the process that we use for city employees. Can you detail for me what the process is then for those city employees? Like what the background check and what the drug testing entails? Is it random? Is it what? I guess I'm just unsure of what I'm voting for.
So again, I would say that I believe it's fair to say that it varies, right? Because there are certain, I think, union contracts come into play as well, but there are certain positions across the city where they are being drug tested randomly. I think it is fair to say that when you are hired by the city, wherever you are at, you are subject to drug testing, right? Even if it's not randomly happening, you are part of your orientation as a city employee includes acknowledging that you can be drug tested.
Okay.
And then there are background checks that are throughout the, when a city employee is hired, background check is part of that process.
And that's the process that I think the least aware of, what that looks like and what the implications are from that process. So I guess what constitutes, if I get a, speeding ticket 8 years ago, if I am caught in a much more serious crime, like, I guess, what does the background check entail?
When you say what does the background check entail, here's, there is a standard background check that's done. It runs criminal history, right? And then it would, like if it's run through I'm just going to use a department, a director as an example, and if I'm hiring someone, a background check would come, and we would see if there was anything concerning in that background check, that criminal history that came back. What might be concerning for me could be different depending on what I am trying to hire for. What might be concerning for me might not be the same for LTU, as an example, for certain positions that they're hiring for. And to pick on LTU again, I think that there are also union contracts that sort of, they've negotiated and dictated criminal history and how that would come into play for particular positions as well.
Yeah.
So it's not depends.
Yeah, I know. Classic, and I appreciate that. Okay, that's helpful. Councilman Beckius, I have then just a few follow-up questions about drug testing. City Attorney Christie mentioned that city employees can be subject to it. Is your intent to have these aides be subject to it, or is your intent that it's like a mandatory drug test?
I think that would be dependent upon the counselor hiring the individual.
Okay. And then that's kind of a similar question that I have with the background check. If what maybe concerns me versus what concerns another council member.
Right.
Okay.
Same. I think that it provides the opportunity for council members who may decide to hire someone that they maybe don't know as well as
Yeah.
maybe other folks.
Yeah.
To provide that clarifying information to them.
Mhm.
And I think it also aids in making sure constituents understand that the folks that they're interacting with are meeting those two basic standards.
Okay. And that's helpful. And so, just like, I want to make sure I understand the intent, because I think this is something that I'm supportive of. And so I want to make sure. So if an individual that I plan on entering into for a professional service agreement, for council aid services, say they ran a stop sign 2 years ago, that would not preclude them, or, a similar incident, that would not preclude them from being my...
I hope not.
Yeah, okay, well, and that's why
But
I'm so curious, because I'm not
think-
familiar with this
but
process.
I do think it provides the opportunity, for example, if a council aide were at a constituent park opening, for
Yeah.
example, and accidentally hurt a child,
Yeah.
for example, and maybe have been observed to be under the influence, that provides the opportunity right then and there to provide drug testing if that's needed.
Thank you.
Councilman Weber,
We have Director McIntyre here now, if there are additional questions, Councilman Weber.
Thank you.
and while she walks up, I just wanted to note that every week we look at liquor license applications, and we get the background check in front of us, and you can see what is cleared. We just, I mean, I don't mean it's cleared from the record.
No,
I mean, we
yeah.
see the record, and we go, all right, we're still going to issue you one, even if you've run a stop sign.
Absolutely. And I just didn't know if
Fed,
it looked,
down the
if it
highway.
looked different for hiring or contracts, but yeah.
And Councilman Weber, I also want to make clear here too, there's nothing in here that requires any of our peers to be involved in that process at all, but it does allow for a base level of information provided to the hiring counselor.
I appreciate that.
Director McIntyre,
afternoon.
welcome.
Thank you.
Councilman Weber, I don't know if you have questions.
So
for
I don't
Director-
know if on your way down here or from the other building, I was just trying to understand what the background check process looks like and what the drug testing process would look like for individuals who are entering into this professional service agreement, since my understanding is that that's not the typical process for a professional service agreement. So I just want to understand how we're altering it.
So a lot of our professional services agreements, we wouldn't necessarily be doing a background check on them or drug screening. A lot of them are independent consultants that have their own firms, and so we hire them through those firms. And we have some requirements as far as cyber insurance or personal liability insurance and things like that, because they are basically running their own business, right? And then they invoice us for their hours. It was my understanding that you guys were looking at this with maybe individuals who weren't necessarily coming to us from a consulting business or firm that they worked with. And so if you wanted to do a background check or something like that on the individual, we can partner with you to set up a process or a way for the city council to do that, and for those results to come back to you guys as council members. The city or HR can partner with you to help you set up a process to do that. And if you want to know what we typically check,
Yes,
I can
please
walk
do.
through that
Yes,
too.
yeah, please do.
So if it was an employee,
101, right?
Right. We'll
Yeah.
just say if it was an employee, what do we typically look at? We look at 7 years of criminal history, and we look at the convictions, and we look at those as being job related. So if a conviction isn't job related, it doesn't disqualify them for a job. If it is, then it does, right? So that's what we're looking for is job related criminal convictions that would disqualify them. So we'll look at that. We'll look at their records as far as we can check references, any references they put down to make sure that the jobs they said they've held. We can check degrees. So you say you have a bachelor's in something, do you really have it, right? So prior employment, criminal history, educational requirements. If they claim they have any specialty certifications that are relevant to your job, we can check those. Generally, we do not drug test every single employee that we hire. We do those where it's required because they're going to have a CDL or some of those things. But like some of our seasonal temporary employees, we don't necessarily do that. It would be something that would be, let's talk about it. Would it make sense in these roles? Because a lot of our positions at the city, we obviously do the drug testing, especially at point of hire, and then sometimes not randomly. Then if it's not required as part of the job, we don't do randoms. But anyone who drives and has a CDL, we do. Trying to think, what else do we commonly check?
No, that's
Those are
really
some of the
comprehensive.
common
I always learn
factors.
so much, Director McIntyre, about HR, the world of HR. I find it fascinating. That answers my question. So thank you.
I've got a question for
Councilman Duden?
you only go back 7 years on critical.
Most of the time, our reports show us things back further, but we don't necessarily always consider something, depending on, we look at, like, there's all these different kind of gray lines we look at with a criminal history report, but generally it's 7 years of criminal history that we go back, yeah.
So if an individual got sentenced to prison 8 years ago, 10-year sentence, and got out early,
We're still going to see it, but we may not. So to tell you the truth, it all shows up. On our background checks, it all shows up. But because it's been, we would look at that too. When did they get released, right? So they got sentenced here or convicted here. When did they get out? What was the offense? Is there a pattern of behavior to this? Like, all of that is the stuff HR looks at. All of those things, but yeah.
Okay, Councilman Bowers.
So I think I have one question for you. With professional service agreements now, individuals can choose to do background checks and drug screening on their folks if they choose to, right?
Generally, HR is not doing that. That's not coming through my department. That's coming through, it's kind of like, the best way I could describe this is if we hired an individual within HR to come in when we were staffing up and provide support. She had her own firm, right? And she came in and worked for us as a consultant. But we hired the firm. She had her own firm. They invoiced us. And we did not do those things because the beauty of an individual consultant role is if it's not working out or if there becomes issues for concern, we can just say, hey, we want to go ahead and end our contract and quit utilizing you, and we'll find another individual to utilize. So those relationships look a little different, right? But a lot of, depending on where they're coming from, a lot of them, those items are, hopefully the firm that hired them did those when they hired them. I have worked somewhere, which it was a little different. It's not happened at the city, but we brought on a lot of temporary staffing through like a Kelly Services. And when we told Kelly what we wanted them to do in their background check, but we didn't run them. We had Kelly run them and say, these were our requirements. We want you guys following these requirements. And then a lot of those people, it was a call center, so lots of turnover on call centers. A lot of those people then flipped to be full-time employees for the company I worked for. And at the time they flipped, part of our contract with Kelly was you'll hand us over their background check so we don't have to rerun it. So it saved us money, and then we had that for our file because now they're our employee. But generally, if they're not our employee, we don't run those background checks because we get into an area called co-employment or joint employer. And those joint employer laws, this is where I probably need Johansi or someone else. There are some things that say if you have these certain things, then you're a joint employer. And if you're a joint employer, and I'm not an attorney, so this is Barb's understanding of the world. Okay, I'm like, where is he?
I know, search for an attorney. I love that.
I need an attorney, right? Because then we can be liable for things. We can be liable that they have paid holidays. They might be able to get onto our health insurance and some things like that, which is what we wouldn't want, right? If we're going to go down that path, then let's just make them temporary employees. So there's some co-employer stuff, which I know. I'm not an attorney, so I would have to have one.
I don't think we need to go into details. I would just say, generally speaking, the courts, it's a balancing act, and they look at factors, and there can be enough factors that tip it into scale where a court will say, I don't care that you have characterized this as an independent contractor. They are an employee, and they must be treated as such, and that is basically what you're saying.
Right. There's different things they look at.
Right. So.
Gotcha. So, I mean, that sounds, okay, that kind of muddies it up even more on like, you know, are they professional service agreements? But I hear the spirit. I think that this just kind of adds a whole other equation. So a question that I have for you, Tom, is it sounds like your intent is this to only apply to council aids and not other professional service agreements?
I think the scope of our discussion right now is council aids because we're talking about the council aid proposal. I think certainly if council wanted to extend this to other professional service agreements throughout the entire city of Lincoln, that's certainly our prerogative.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm
Do that separately.
And I'm not even saying that I'm in opposition to it, but I think that, you know, if we start talking about changing professional service agreements for one specific branch of government, it needs to be a conversation about the whole entire city's operation, not just carving out a different special set of rules for us as the legislative branch. So I think because, you know, it kind of might muddy things up between if they are professional service agreements or employees, and because this could attempt to create a difference of rules between the legislative branch and the executive branch. And I think, you know, I think the points that you're bringing up are very fair, right? Like if there's a concern about, you know, someone getting hurt at a park or whatever, I don't think that our scope of concern should just be worried about one branch of government. And I think that we need to look at having a serious conversation then about the entire city if that is the reasoning behind this.
And I would be very welcoming to that conversation. I don't think, personally speaking, that there's any harm in requiring professional consultants interacting with the city to abide by these same standards.
And this is the last thing that I'll say, then I'll stop talking so we can just move on. But I think that if we're going to do this for council aids, then, you know, we need to make sure that we do this for other aids and other departments and not just one specifically because, again, I'm not saying I'm in opposition, just to be very clear on that. But I think because we are responsible for all departments, right, not just our own, then we need to put this in part of a conversation at relooking professional service agreements as a whole, which I think would be a very interesting conversation to have. And I think that would be a much bigger conversation than executing professional service agreements in the process that currently exists.
Any other points of conversation or discussion on this?
Yeah, I just have some discussion, and it's more so than anything thinking out loud. You know, if the intent of this amendment is not to be preclusive in nature and still allows council members autonomy in making decisions of who is the best fit for their council aid services, I think that this is something I could support.
Thank you, Councilman Weber. I agree that if this is something that's going to help us, one, I want it to be standardized, so I don't mind the reference to consultant agreement, the standard consultant agreement. When we're talking about background checks and drug testing, I think I would want those tools if I'm going to hire someone that I am not familiar with. Even if someone I think I'm familiar with, I would want those tools. I don't want to review background checks for anybody else's aide. So if someone says, I'm hiring an aide, okay, but I'd like to know that you have these tools available to you. I'd like to know that we're all using the same standard when we write the contract. But I don't want to review more background checks than I absolutely have to review in any point.
And I would just like to reiterate, Councilman Weber, that the intent here is not for other counselors to review the hiring decisions of other counselors specifically.
Yeah, and I think that would be my only concern.
So if I could ask a point of clarification, the wording of this agreement where it says, let's go past 6/3/24, where we begin, and background checks and drug testing requirements for city employees will apply to council aides. Is that the wording you'd like to use, or is there another word you would?
I'm open to amendments.
I
If
would-
there is some wordsmithing that people would like to do.
I would amend, I would make an amendment that we exchange the word will for may.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I'd be supportive of that amendment.
Thank you for allowing the chair to make an amendment.
Call that a friendly amendment.
I think we'll call that a friendly amendment. Thank you. Any other questions? Then if we accept this as a friendly amendment, I'm looking seriously at the attorney.
Yes, because we talked about it at the outset.
Yes, we did.
Right? I don't want to get into the third amendment, but I'm comfortable with where
Okay.
we're at.
Then, Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the amendment.
Duden,
No.
Carlson,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Bowers,
No.
Schob,
No.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 4-3.
All right. Any other amendments?
Madam Chair, yes. Amendment B to number 11, which would change the source of reappropriated funds, specifically to designate $168,000 in fiscal year 2024 to 25, and $168,000 in fiscal year 2025 to 2026 of City Council reappropriated funds in order to fund the submittal of Councilman Bowers.
All right. Are there, first, do we have a second?
Second for discussion.
Okay. Now, do we have any questions to clarify?
I do.
Okay.
Or I guess, does Councilman Beckius would like to speak first, I guess?
The intent here is to utilize city council reappropriated funds instead of general council funding to fund Councilman Bowers' proposal. To back up a little bit in the process, I'm not even, our budget currently, for example, for 2023, 2024, is looking like it's probably going to have about $100,000 of reappropriated funding moving to the next bucket shortly. That would take our city council appropriation, for example, from about round figures, 288,000 to 390,000 sitting in that bucket. Depending on how many of us actually use the council aid program, there may be a possibility that we could just fund the program from our existing budget and not even use reappropriated funds from either the general fund or the city council fund at all. What we have before us now, I believe, if I understand the structure, is that there would be reappropriated funds from the city clerk's office and then the general fund reserves to use for the program. Now, of course, any unused funds would not carry forward as detailed in Councilman Bowers' proposal. But what would continue to happen is if the next 2 budget years act as though they have been acting for the last 2 budget years at City Council, the reappropriated bucket of funds continues to grow. So right now, in the next 30 days or so, we're going to be at $390,000 sitting in that bucket. Because we're using reappropriated funds, that will probably continue to grow next fiscal year, let's say 490. Next fiscal year after that, maybe 590,000. And those are estimates and round ballpark figures. But what will continue to happen is, because we're not using our existing city budget for City Council, and because we're using reappropriated funds, we're funding this program using other dollars, while our reappropriated fund balance will continue to grow. And even if we were to, let's say, for example, just in theory, if we're talking, if 3 members were to use the council aid to their fullest extent, that would be an expenditure of $72,000 annually. That reappropriated fund balance would still continue to grow by $28,000 ballpark, even if we used city budget dollars that we're already budgeting for our programming to pay for the council aid positions. So the intent here is to really, I think that we have, and I'd certainly be open if people wanted to use our existing budget in order to fund these positions, because there's certainly room in our existing budget to fund these positions. We don't have to move to reappropriated funds or general reserve funds in order to carry that. And I have Sherry Wolf here, who may or may not be able to provide information as, generally speaking, once again, ballpark as to what we're looking at. But there are a couple of different options here that we could play around with that would not impact City Council reserve reappropriation budgeting right now if we didn't want to. But we could use it for that purpose as well. Sherry, am I accurately describing what you find to be the state of the City Council budget and how we might move forward with this program if we wanted to fund it directly out of the budget we currently have existing?
I think that the majority of the savings that you have in your budget typically come from vacancy savings in your salaries. So again, I think Ben's position wasn't fully funded. All of this fiscal year is where a lot of your savings come from. So essentially, it will depend how your reappro grows will depend on whether or not you're fully staffed.
Right, and how many council aides that we use.
Correct.
But specifically, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. I apologize.
No, I
Councilman.
appreciate it.
But generally speaking, I hear Councilman Bowers when he is talking about grabbing back funds from the city clerk's office. In speaking with the city clerk's office, I think that she does have potential projects to use those funds. And if it makes sense to maybe use the existing pool of funds that we have, that's what this proposal would do. With that, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I appreciate the information. I think I may have a question for Councilman Bowers as the introducer, and I think I will have a few questions for Sherry, just going over the numbers. I don't think it's a secret. I am not a numbers guy, right? I'm a lawyer. I'm not a numbers guy. Councilman Bowers, this is, an amendment to your proposal, and so I'm curious to see your thoughts on the funding mechanism.
Yeah, so I think with the vacancy savings from that's in the reserves for the city council account, it seems like it's dependent on, if Ben sticks with us or if he doesn't. It seems like it's less stable funding, especially for the first 2 years before this becomes a line item moving forward. Look, if Sony has better uses for, those dollars, like I support Sony, but I would not support necessarily taking out of city council reserves. The general fund that we have in reserves is a much bigger pool of money that I think would be more appropriate if that's kind of what what folks' will is, you know what I mean, if to not take it from city clerk's office. Because to be very clear, and I think I said this in my opening statements, this was not about the lack of anything specifically with the city clerk. It's about making sure that the city clerk's office has the resources that they needed to do their job. That position went unfilled, and that was identified as a priority from the council, and that priority was not executed through the powers that be. And so if I would not be supportive of taking it out of city council reserves, because I think that there's other tools to do that in. Does that make sense?
That answers my question. And I think that's actually a good lead into Sherry. I have a few questions for you, and I just want to go over numbers. And please correct me if I start going down the wrong path. So $168,000 for 2 fiscal years, that's $336,000, right? My understanding is that currently, right, there's $288,000 in reserves. And I know Councilman Beckius touched on, projections, estimations. I was wondering if maybe you could go into more detail about it, because I'm curious if there is adequate funding from council reserves for this proposal.
Okay. I'm going to just kind of give you a summary that Tom and I discussed earlier,
Thank
I
you.
believe this week. Was it this week? Maybe last week?
Maybe. It's hard to remember now.
About the current status of the council's budget. So as of today, you have $403,000 remaining in your budget.
Okay.
$288,500 of that is your current reappropriated funds that has shown up on the report we've been sharing with all of you this week. So you will have one more payroll come out of this year's budget. Tom, I forgot what the number was, but I'm looking. It looks like your payrolls are running around $8,000 a payroll. So that $403,000, did I say, will go down about $8,000, maybe a little bit more for some other incidental expenses that Ben might have to pay for the remainder of August. So, let's see here. Another thing I should maybe point out is that you also have your education and training line item. That has been a line item that's been being reappropriated for a number of years. So that makes up $87,000 of your $403,000 at this point in time. The savings that are being generated this year from salary savings while you had vacancies is about $35,000.
Okay.
So again, I don't know that this would happen every year, but because the majority of these savings have been generated by the vacant researcher position and turnover in your staff person.
Thank you. Sherry, that's excellent.
Did it
Thank
all
you.
add
No,
up?
yes,
All right.
yep, that's exactly why I asked you to come up here. Thank goodness we have city staff like Sherry for a process like this. Hey, no, I appreciate it. Councilman Beckius, that would then lead me to have a question for you. Is there room to compromise with Councilman Bowers and look at general fund reserves? And if so, would that make this proposal more appealing to you to be able to support in its entirety?
That would be fine.
Could you repeat that, please?
Me?
Yes.
I was asking Councilman Beckius if changing the funding mechanism from city council reserves to general fund reserves is something he'd support, and then if that amendment would make this proposal something that he could support overall. So instead of city council reappropriate funds, it'd be the general reserves, general fund reserves.
I would be agreeable to the introduction of an amendment to that. I think it does beg the question of at what point does the council maybe readjust its budget going forward to stop increased appropriations going forward. And the other thing to keep in mind is that while we're thinking that there's going to be $168,000 of cost each year, I don't imagine that we'll get anywhere close to that expenditure. And so I wonder if the opportunity presents itself in 2 years to simply fold the programming, should this pass, into the current budget with very little or minor modification going forward, because what we're doing now has an impact that I know we've heard from our other council members about not liking.
I'd like to add my comments on this. Your conversation about moving to general reserves, what I can support about that is that I don't feel like we're taking away from the finance department, because I do believe that reappropriated dollars, even if the person wasn't hired, the position wasn't filled, I do know where we have some need in the finance department, things that directly affect how city council works and how we interact with the public. And I just want to make certain that that those reappropriated dollars that still lie with finance are able to be expended by finance in this moment of need, when we have some systems and software that need addressing and updating. But I also really believe that our reappropriated dollars that sit there in our council budget are appropriately used for council staffing, whether or not that is staffing that we hire as employees or staffing we contract with as independent contractors. And so I am really hesitant about reaching into general reserves for our staffing when we have a sizable amount of council reserve. And today, we have solidified that reserve by not using that reserve in other manners. And so I really don't want to begin this program for the next 2 years by relying on general reserves. My compromise would be that we start this program with council reserves absolutely in the first year, and any savings that were accrued in this year, of course, stay with council reappropriations, but we look at that when we go to appropriate in the next year, because it's council, this is a council expenditure. We have savings because we let a position lapse. I think we should use those savings for our staffing. And this gives us a full amount of time to discuss how we want to move forward and how we should fund that. And I'm willing to have those conversations over the next 2 years, so that when we get, or actually next 18 months, so that when we get into the nitty-gritty budgeting, that we can have that conversation, be prepared to discuss out loud why we think that we need to increase our staffing budget. But right now, we have savings, and I don't think we're going to put ourselves at risk in any way if we use our savings for staffing.
One thing I want to say, and just to be super clear about, is the reason why, it started the conversation of, using the vacancy savings is because I was really frustrated when I found out that the council had essentially identified a priority to support the city clerk's office, and that did not happen, right? So as I was trying to craft a proposal, I was trying to look for a way to pay for this, to pay for my proposal without providing an idea without coming up with a solution, right? So, and I think, you know, Sony, we all owe our lives to her. So, I mean, I feel like Sony could almost ask us for anything and we would figure out a way to make it happen because we are so lucky to have her here. I mean, I think the thing that's concerning about the city council reserves is, I mean, as we've noticed for the past hour and a half alone, the past couple of weeks, is that like this funding doesn't seem stable, right? I mean, there seems to be like a lot of competing interests. And so that's why I had mentioned taking it from the vacancy savings that would have been part of the city council budget over the past 2 years had we not done that and the end result of the council's action had not occurred. Using general funds, because I knew that there was other proposals coming out about draining the city council reserves. And I know that we still have, what was it, remodeling or something like that you started?
Well,
For the Public Service Commission? What was
the county commissioners have requested the Public Building Commission to remodel the city council suite.
And I honestly didn't mean,
but that's at the request of the county board.
Right, and I didn't mean that in any sort of weird way. But like what I meant from that is that, you know, that there are dollars that are being committed, right? And so that's how I came up with the funding stream. I'm still not entirely convinced that, you know, the city council reserves are not entirely spoken for. There's already been a huge battle over it, and that's what makes me nervous about city council reserves.
Though I can understand you being concerned about what feels tentative, I think that by funding our staffing out of council reserves, they would then be spoken for. And in regards to the remodel project, that is being paid for out of the Public Building Commission, and the only portion that we have left to pay for is some furniture.
Our portion, I apologize, Council Chair, I apologize. Councilman Bowers was just asking me how much I believe that our portion of that remodel would cost. Public Building Commission will pay for the majority of that remodel, but there are some smaller furniture type items that we would need to purchase. Council Chair Washington and I think, have estimated a potential on the very high side, I think, of maybe a $20,000 expenditure there. So not a lot of money. And then certainly with Councilman Weber's passage of his proposal using general revenue funding for the LFR and LPD training, certainly that money remains available. And our current status, or our soon to be, I think, estimated status, is a balance of about $390,000, which is 118% of our current budget. It's a healthy amount, and I do concur with Council Chair Washington that city council functions should be paid for by the city council department, and I don't think that that's inappropriate. I don't think, because I don't believe that there's going to be a lot. I don't think the majority of council members will utilize this program, that it will drain it. I am not a fan of using general funds in this way, but the only reason I'm willing to do it is because I think it's the only way to protect the city clerk's office funding, because I believe that there is a need there. I believe if you talk to the city clerk, you will get that information. I believe if you are aware that Granicus is not a best solution, that we might have data migration issues, they would love to go wireless or paperless, they have a whole host of items that they could implement. And so the only reason that I would be entertaining Councilman Weber's ideology of taking it from reserve funding would be to protect those dollars and not claw them back.
Councilman Weber.
And I appreciate that. And I was just doing some quick math. Sherry, again, correct me if I start misspeaking. But some, reappropriations have been a topic of discussion over the last few days. And I just was thinking through, right? only, and I'm not saying that I think there will only be 3 council members that utilize this, but I'm just using that as an example, right? That would roughly be $72,000 a year as an expense. Over the 2 fiscal years, that'd be $144,000. If $336,000 is allotted for this, and only $144,000 is used, that would leave roughly $192,000 to then be reappropriated. And and where I approach this is that could either be $192,000 in council reserves, or that could be $192,000 in the general fund reserves that then could be reappropriated to Parks and Rec for ball fields or libraries or urban development or planning. And I think that may make the most sense where we're at. I again, just thinking out loud on that one.
Councilman Weber, I just wanted to point out that if you initially use city council funds and they go and they're not used and they reappropriate back, it doesn't add to the total.
Okay. And perfect. Sherry is here. Yeah, please correct me.
Can I make a clarification?
Yes, I would love it.
This is something that light bulbs are just going off for me as well as I listen to you guys discuss this. The language in Mr. Beckius' current motion says to designate $168,000 of reappropriated funds each year. And then the last sentence still has, at the end of each fiscal year, any council aid appropriations will lapse. So I think that we would maybe want to amend this language a little bit. I would suggest maybe that you say something like you'd like to authorize up to $168,000 of reappropriated funds. You would only move that money from your reappropriated funds balance when someone contracted for professional services. The rest of the money would remain in your reappropriated funds until it was contracted for or spent. And then you could still lapse it. It wouldn't carry forward, but you wouldn't be lapsing your full $168,000 of reappropriated funds that was not used for professional service agreements.
Sherry, would you do me a favor and say which page are you on?
I am on page 7.
Thank you. Got it.
Page 7 or 4?
I'm sorry, wait. I'm not on the same paper that you guys are.
Yeah.
Okay, because I have the
it
script.
down.
I'm sorry.
and
Page 3, I know, I'm on page 7 with you, Sandra. Everyone else is on page 3.
Or 4?
4. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me just catch up here for 1 second. Oh.
Here, we can use the same document that you've got in front of you. Okay.
And
Got it.
Councilman
Yes,
Bowers,
you're correct.
or excuse me,
You're correct.
Councilman Weber, I do apologize. I've been using the word appropriate. I should have been using the word designate. I
Okay.
apologize for that.
Yeah.
Okay, can we get everybody back on the same page, literally? Can we talk about
Yes.
page 4?
Okay, perfect.
I'll go off script and go to the real handout.
All right, we're on Amendment B to number 11. And so underlined in the second paragraph, we've used the language designate 168,000. And I would suggest that we maybe change that to authorize up to 168,000. Thus, any reappro that is not contracted for will remain in your reappropriated funds and not lapse at the end of the fiscal year per the last sentence in the paragraph.
Councilman Shob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sherry, I'm following you. Rather than taking it out, maybe using it, putting it back, or just leave it there in the general fund reserves until, as you said, in place of designate appropriate. Can we just strike the last line at the end of the fiscal year if we do that?
I think with this funding source, you could for your reappropriated funds. It was intended if additional cash reserves were added to your budget, we didn't want to build the reappro. But if it's already coming out of your reappro, again, I just don't think if there's doesn't appear that all 7 council members might use their 24,000, we don't really know what the number is. And so you could just agree amongst yourselves that you're gonna leave your reappropriated funds where they sit, and each time someone signs a contract, an agreement, at that time, those reappropriated funds would come out of that line item and be moved for consultants.
Okay.
So I think I got a little lost. Out of general or out of city council?
City council.
This would be if we
City
were talking
council.
city council.
Gotcha.
If
I
you
understand.
appropriate additional general, I think that's when we want to strike it and not have that carry forward year after year.
Okay.
So I,
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to double check.
Sure.
Because what I understand is that the sentence that is in here that was also in the original proposal says that they will lapse to general fund reserves. Even in the original proposal is using general fund reserves. So what it's saying is if you don't use that general fund reserves by the year, it'll lapse back in the general fund reserves. If you use council reappropriation, and I'm just repeating, then you don't want it to lapse into the
Right.
general fund
Right.
reserves.
And
So
so
it needs
that,
to stay where it
that
is.
would be.
We're saying the same thing.
Perfect.
Yep.
We all agree.
Right.
and,
But
and
the-
so because we're trying to craft this on the dais while we're discussing this, I wanted you to look at that second paragraph that we're mostly focused on right now on page 4. So the second paragraph under Amendment B, that says authorize, you just said authorize up to. That sentence then is clear. And then at the very bottom of the paragraph, Councilman Shob had suggested we strike at the end of each fiscal year, that sentence. I would like to look at the sentence just ahead of that, so the second to last sentence in that paragraph. So we've already said these aides are optional. Council members cannot hire the same individual. Council members determine the length and the dollar amount. And the contracts run through city law, period. The next sentence reads, no appropriation for council aides will be reappropriated to future fiscal years. It feels as if that sentence may be
I would agree with you.
unnecessary
I would
if we're
agree.
talking about council reappropriated funding.
Funds we're talking about. But otherwise, the last two sentences say, whatever we have left over at the end of the year, it goes back to the general fund, and we start with 0.
It goes back to reappropriated council funds if we're talking
What
about
is
this.
written on the paper now.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
says go back to 0,
And-
we sweep it all out.
And I apologize, the underlined information is what I had sent to Sherry. It was not inserted into this particular paragraph, so I apologize for that. The intent here, and certainly I would be happy and very open to amendment, would be that any sort of unused dollars would remain in city council reappropriated funding. Yes.
Because this is important and we've spent a lot of time on it right now, would it be appropriate to call for a 10-minute recess so we can get the wording that is intended down, and we'll come back and then share that generally?
We'd
so
be
that
happy.
the press and the public watching all understand what we're trying to accomplish, but without wordsmithing right now.
We'd be happy to.
If that is amenable to everyone, as chair, I am going to call a 10-minute recess. We'll be back here at the top of the hour. Welcome back. I'm calling this meeting back into order from recess. Thank you for your patience. We now have clearly written amendments provided that we can discuss.
Madam
So,
Chair?
with that, Councilman Beckius.
Madam Chair, I'd like to withdraw Amendment B to Proposal 11.
All right. All right, there was a motion to withdraw, and like earlier today, we don't need a second, but we do need a vote. Motion B to submittal 11 has been withdrawn, has been asked for withdrawn from Councilman Beckius. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Carlson,
Yes.
Yes.
Bowers, Schob,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilman Beckius.
I would like to introduce Amendment 2B to number 11. Counselors have the new language in front of them, but for folks watching, it authorizes up to $168,000 in fiscal year 2024 through 2025, and up to $168,000 in fiscal year 2025, 2026 of City Council reappropriated funds. At the bottom of the sheet, it strikes the following language. No appropriations for council aids will be reappropriated to future fiscal years. At the end of each fiscal year, any council aid appropriations will lapse to general fund reserves. Once again, it strikes that language from Councilman Bowers' proposal.
And are there any questions to clarify this proposal or this proposed amendment? All right, I need a second. Oh, sorry, you do.
I got a discussion, but
Okay, let's wait discussion, but if anyone needed
Questions
a
here, yeah.
word, something clarified in the wording? If not, I'll take a second.
Second.
Second, Weber. All right, now discussion.
Good to go?
Council, yes,
Okay.
Councilman Bowers.
I'm not going to talk about the next potential amendment because that one's one I'm more in favor of than the second one. I think what's concerning about this is, it's 168 for the first year, 168 for the second year. That comes out to 326. We'll still have outstanding debts for the remodel at 20,000 and other things that pop up. That brings us up to 346. So I'm concerned about how much that this is going to drain, the separate branch of government's pocket of money compared to the other branch of government. And in addition to that, I still think it's really inappropriate that, and this is something that I voted against, was, 2 years ago, the council made its will known and said that, we're going to use these dollars for this specific purpose. And that did not occur. And I'm afraid that sends out the message that says, if the council reappropriates money to another department and they wait it out, then those dollars then become open for other purposes than what the council at the time originally intended it for. And that's concerning to me. To be very clear, that was not the city clerk's decision. So I just want to be super clear as I'm talking about the city clerk's office. That's not a city clerk's decision. Sony is the best city clerk in the state, and it's an honor to have her here. So I just want to be very clear about that and still state my concern about city council appropriating dollars to create a position to help out a department, and this incentivizing that department or those individuals or that branch can just wait out the timer for 2 years, and then all of a sudden they have unrestricted dollars that can then be used for another project that the council at the time did not intend.
Any other comments? Well, I would offer this, that I believe that using reappropriated dollars from our own department makes sense to me. This is a staffing issue. And though 2 years ago, when I voted to reduce the staffing by that FTE, I lacked the imagination to even begin to assume that we'd be having conversations about professional services contracts for personal aids. And so I can understand how we got here now. Wish I could have seen that in the future, in the crystal ball. I didn't, but being here today, I believe this is a staffing issue. It should be paid for with council reappropriated dollars. Any other comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
And point of order, just to be clear, this first vote, funds coming from city council.
Council reappropriated.
Council reappropriated.
Yes.
Thank
All right, Madam Clerk.
Beckius,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Carlson,
you. No.
Bowers,
No.
Weber,
No.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 4-3.
All right. We are now to Amendment C, yes.
Go on, keep going.
All right, so we have a third amendment on item 11, submitted by Councilmember Weber, to transfer $133,121 in vacancy savings, $65,084 from fiscal year 22-23, and $68,037 from fiscal year 23-24 from the Finance City Clerk budget and Finance reappropriations, general expense, employee benefits to the City Council fiscal year 2024-25 budget and appropriate $34,879 from general fund reserves for a total of $168,000 to City Council fiscal year 24-25. Appropriate an additional $168,000 of general fund reserves to City Council fiscal year 25-26. These appropriations would be used for individual council members to enter into professional service agreements with individual council aides, the council members' discretion and compliance with applicable laws. Council aides would be used to help council members fulfill their duties, which include but are not limited to policy research, constituent response, drafting position statements, project assistance, facilitating internal communication and external outreach, and resident neighborhood support. It is optional for a council member to enter into a professional service agreement for council aid services. Council members cannot enter into professional services agreements with an individual that is currently in a professional service agreement with another council member. Council members can approve the length and dollar amount of the professional service agreements for their aids in collaboration with city law. These services would be considered professional services as referenced in the City of Lincoln Charter, Article 7, Section 2, and as defined by the Lincoln Municipal Code 2.18.030. All professional service agreements must comply with the City of Lincoln Charter, Article 7, Section 2, Lincoln Municipal Code, Chapter 218, and all other applicable laws and regulations. The agreements must be prepared by the City Law Department and shall identify the City Council member who will receive the benefit of the professional service. No appropriation for council aids will be appropriated to future fiscal years. At the end of each fiscal year, any council aid appropriations will be lapsed to general fund reserves. Councilman Bowers.
Or Weber.
Weber, I'm so sorry. I looked.
I don't know
right
if that's a
at you.
compliment or an insult. I don't know.
It's
a compliment.
I'm just kidding.
It's a mistake.
But I would move this amendment for the purposes of discussion at this point.
I'll second.
Our second, Bowers.
And I just wanted City Attorney Christie to come up here briefly and speak to, so this is Amendment C that was introduced before Amendment A or B were passed. And so I'm curious just logistically how Amendment A and B are related to Amendment C as it presently is before us.
Maybe if I do this. My understanding is that this portion right here, I think, is what Councilman Weber, you are proposing as additional language. What was the paragraph before that? The paragraph before that, Amendment C to this right here, you essentially just voted on language that changed this.
Okay.
And so certainly you are in a position to make amendments as you choose, but I would just point out, it's my understanding, again,
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, that this, when we start on this page, that this would be the language that I think you are proposing to add at this time.
Yeah, yes, and I specifically, so Amendment A, if you go back to that page that you were just on, my understanding that Amendment A would be following, if this inserted language were to pass, that it would be following in collaboration with city law? Or would that precede it?
Right, wait.
Run through city law.
So that, in my version, that was also stricken, and it looked like that was also taken out of Amendment A by Councilmember Beckius. The contracts run through city law, that's no longer relevant. And then, so so it would read as like, council members can approve the length and dollar amount of the professional service agreements for their aides in collaboration with city law. City of Lincoln Law Department standard consultation agreement dated 6/3/24 will be utilized to hire council aides, and background checks and drug testing requirements for city employees may apply to council aides. Would that be inaccurate?
Yes, I believe that's where we're at.
Okay. I just, before we got into discussion, I just wanted to make sure because, and I can briefly explain why I introduced the inserted language that I did. On Monday, there was a lot of conversation that for me felt like we were discussing council aides and the professional service agreements in the abstract. And so I really wanted to make the hiring process and the management process as clear as I possibly could for the final resolution that we will vote on the 26th if this proposal were to be adopted. That was the intent of this amendment.
Councilman Bowers, do you have a point of clarification or? Go
No,
ahead,
what I like, so I think that I like what you have here, Brody, because I think that this does what maybe Amendment A was attempting, like what Tom was trying to do with the background check and drug testing requirements in the consultant agreement. I like what you brought forward because I think this does it in a really clean way to outline, professional service agreements and, you have the specific code identified. So I think this is a much cleaner way than what the First Amendment did. And does not create a different set of rules set of rules for the legislative branch versus the executive branch. So I thought what you have here, Brody, is very well written. And I think it provides, more clarification than with your attorney brain versus my social work brain. I like what you have here, and I think that this does what people were attempting to do. So good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Councilman Shob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman Bowers, I hear what you're saying. We did adopt the first section though, didn't we? So if we do this, does that supersede that section, Mr. Christie? I think that first one passed 4-3 to place these standards on the contracts.
So this is, right? What passed?
That was my recollection.
This is what passed that I think I have on the screen, right? That's what you were.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I believe.
Council
Oh,
Amendment
A.
A.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Amendment A.
Amendment A.
Amendment A is what we're referring to.
Amendment A to 11.
Oh, I'm on, do I have the wrong one?
You're on B2, I believe, right?
Yeah,
Number 11, B2.
yeah. So I totally appreciate where you're headed, Councilman Weber. Since I would like to make certain that Amendment A, that we just we're not doing something redundant.
Yeah, which I voted for Amendment A,
Yeah,
so I
and
don't
so,
disagree.
so we said that council members had the ability to manage the cost, the time, whatever. And it seems in my reading, that you wanted to add more duties that it could, would not be limited to, and you added more duties. But the piece that really stands forward just a smidge is the reference to charter and Lincoln Municipal Code. Those, but in actuality, I don't know how that differs. But that section is what is.
And I can pass out, for everyone's awareness, the sections that I've referenced in both Section 2 of the Lincoln Municipal Code as well as Article 7 of the city charter. And I'm thinking I just gave them to you in reverse order.
That's all right.
Here's that as well. And what my intent was, based off of prior conversations with city law, after Monday, so I had prior conversations with city law, and then after Monday's discussion about, is this an independent contractor? Are we engaging in a professional service agreement? Are they going to be a full-time employee? I thought that certain council members felt like there was a maybe lack of clarity, and I wanted to clarify more than anything the definition of professional service agreements within the meaning of us entering into those with council aides. And it was not an intention to add services or duties that council aides will be performing, as well, rather I wanted to be more comprehensive of what my understanding was that council aides would be doing on behalf of council members.
Thank you for the clarification. And just for folks who are watching this or listening, the charter and municipal code that Councilman Weber just distributed highlights sections noting that competitive bidding shall not be required.
And further than defines professional service agreements.
Yes, and defines the professional service agreement. So I just want other folks to understand what was highlighted. In Section 2, it was just competitive bidding shall not be required in purchasing unique or non-competitive articles or in contracting for professional services. That's what you highlighted, that you would like the counselors to see. And in the charter, Section 2 this was charter, Section 2. In Municipal Code 2.18.030 Rules and Regulations, you're asking us to look specifically at subsection G. Upon approval of the purchasing agent, competitive bidding shall not be required when unique or non-competitive articles or services are being purchased, or when no bids have been received after following the formal procedure, or when professional services are being contracted pursuant to the provisions of the City of Lincoln Charter, Article 7.
And something I would propose as maybe a friendly amendment to myself, I don't know, City Attorney, I think I'm giving him a headache, is simplifying it and making sure that we are in compliance with applicable laws, the city code, and the city charter.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, Councilman, I think that's fair, and Councilman Beckius?
Councilman Weber, were you done? I apologize if I interrupted.
Yeah, no, I was done.
Okay.
For now.
If I could, okay, could I ask a question
Yeah.
of you and Mr. Christie as well?
Yes.
I don't necessarily see anything in here that directly conflicts what has been previously passed. Is that your assessment as well?
That is my understanding.
Okay. Mr. Christie, is there anything here that you think directly conflicts with what has passed in terms of Amendment A? Or anything that's not clear to city law?
I don't believe that there is anything that is in conflict. I would agree with you.
I would say that last paragraph, and I think when you highlighted on the screen, that last
no
paragraph was
appropriations
not
for
part of it.
yes,
but-
and
but
I guess
I just want to clarify that,
Yes.
that is not part of this. That-
Thank you, and I should just big picture. I think what we're doing today is you guys are voting on instructions for finance department, the law department to put together actual amendments for the budget. But thank you. It's my understanding that based upon what you just voted on, is my understanding that you are talking about.
Mr. City Attorney, I hate to interrupt. I just noticed that this is not the most recent version of this amendment, and for that reason, I am going to withdraw.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
for at this point, I will withdraw it because there are some issues with it. It's not the most recent one, so I would like to withdraw it.
Well, thank you, Councilman Weber. And according, we're going to be consistent with withdrawals. If the proposer withdraws his own amendment, we don't need a second. We do need a roll call. Madam Clerk.
Well, can I make a statement? I mean, I'm not in opposition to withdrawing it. I just want to make a statement that, I guess just for the record, Brody did a much better job writing out the description of which include but are not limited to policy research, constituent response, drafting position statements, project assistance, facilitating internal communication, external outreach, and resident neighborhood support. And mine was like 3 sentences shorter. So I think Brody did a much better job outlining like what the intent of it was. So I just want to.
Thank you for noting that a second time.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay, so that's been noted twice. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Schob,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right. Now we can vote on the main motion as amended. Madam, any discussion on the main motion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
I don't have it marked as
The
a
main
second.
motion is number
I think
11 as
James needs to
submitted
make
by
it.
Councilmember Bowers.
There's not a
James
Yeah.
needs to make it.
I need someone to move
I
the
thought
main
we
motion
had
in a
it
second.
motioned
second,
already.
Brody.
So moved.
And then I'll second it.
I think so too. It was moved and seconded before.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was moved and seconded.
Thank you.
That's okay.
About 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was. Okay, so, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Okay, Schob,
Yes.
Beckius,
No.
Bowers,
Yes.
Duden,
No.
Carlson,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington.
No.
Motion carried 4-3.
All right. I'm gonna,
I need another recess.
all right. Is there anyone here wishing to speak further on the proposals? This is, oh, right, 1, 2, and 5. Thank
got a
you.
lot.
We still have more to go.
Yes.
Wait a second, I have to get back to the script.
Back to the original 1, 2, 3 now? 1, 2, 5?
Yes, got it. Keep going.
I think flip your whole document. It's the back page. Well, no, it's all right. It should be a 1 on top.
I think she's reading from the script and we're,
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Number 1. All right, we have 3 more items and then open for public comment. Whew. Number 1, submitted by Councilmember Washington for fiscal year 2024-25 to appropriate $50,000 in one-time funding from general fund reserves to help fund the Community Forestry Master Plan. The City of Lincoln's Community Forestry Master Plan will provide elected officials, city staff, city residents, businesses, and the development community with a targeted set of data and recommendations to guide Lincoln's decision-making and community forest management approach. The plan will enhance Lincoln's community forest as critical infrastructure and a treasured resource, providing benefits for future residents, visitors, and businesses. I have no other, well, does the proposer have any? I have no amendments. And no more comments to make on this.
Are you motioning?
I am motioning this.
Second?
Second, Carlson. Madam Clerk. Oh, is there any discussion? I believe we discussed this at some length the last time. Madam Clerk.
Duden,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right. Number 2, submitted by Councilmember Washington for fiscal year 24-25 to appropriate $250,000 in one-time funding from general fund reserves to help fund an updated tree inventory. Lincoln's tree inventory was first completed in 2016. It was done in partnership with the private sector and the Parks Department and provided baseline information which has been added to the asset management system Beehive. However, it is incomplete and in need of updating. Updating the inventory using the latest tools will provide essential data for city staff, including tree species, health, age, size, and location. This will help staff make informed and efficient decisions about planting, pruning, maintenance, and removal of trees. I move this.
Second.
Second, Bowers.
No, that was Becky.
Oh, the Beckius, second Beckius. And I would add to this conversation that this $250,000 was not the sum total of what it takes to do this inventory, but it is being used as a challenge grant against other additional grant funding that is available from the Nebraska Forest Service and by the Arbor Day Foundation. And I just wanted to see if we could at least seed the pot in order to get a full inventory, knowing that 3/4 of this funding, or probably 75% of the funding, would be from grants.
If that was your opening, I just have a statement that I would like to make for discussion. And, you know, you can feel free to provide a rebuttal. You know, this is something that I will not be supporting. We've spent a lot of time talking about how we need to protect, or how we've avoided taking money out of the general fund reserve. And we've been trying to figure out every other way to do that. And so because the council has expressed a strong interest in protecting the general fund for the other things that have come up, I don't think I'm going to be able to support taking $250,000 from the general fund reserves.
All right, any other comments? Discussion? All right. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Carlson,
Yes.
Bowers,
No.
Schob,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
All right. And number 5, submitted by Councilmember Duden to designate $50,000 in funding from fiscal year 2024-25 CIP Park Project, Park Acquisition, Demolition, and Development Projects to support the development and implementation of a ball field improvements plan. Work with the Parks and Recreation Foundation to identify a grant, donation, or corporate sponsorship to match the amount designated in the Parks and Recreation CIP project. This plan would help efficiently and effectively direct additional funding for ball field improvements.
Yes, I'd like to move this forward.
Second?
Second, Carlson. Any conversation, discussion, clarification? I would add that I think this is really necessary. I appreciated the robust conversation we had a month ago on this proposal, and I wholeheartedly support the action that this will take.
Ditto.
All right. Madam Clerk.
Beckius,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right. Now, I would like to recognize that there could be people from the public here who would like to speak, and so this is the opportunity. If there's anyone here wishing to speak on any of these proposals.
Seeing none, Madam Chair, I'd move adjournment.
That concludes our meeting on final budget proposals. I want to thank all
Sorry, I
council.
apologize.
That's all right. I want to thank all council members and city staff for your time today. We will reconvene in council chambers on Monday for a regular meeting, and on August 26th, we will convene specifically to vote on all budget amendments and resolutions. Thank you very much. This meeting is now adjourned.